Hello, everybody. In this particular lecture, we are going to be talking about communication sampling. And I am using this word communication very intentionally because we are going to talk about speech. We're going to talk about language, both receptive and expressive language. We're going to be talking about listening to the voice quality. We'll be talking about play, pragmatics, as well as non-spoken communication as well. And so we want to call this a communication sample so that we're being very specific, that it's not a speech sample, it's not a language sample, but making sure that we're using our terminology correctly. So these are the things that we're going to discuss. So we'll talk about how do we collect and transcribe this data, breaking it down. So MLUs versus T units. So MLUs being from the first time we start talking, so about 12 months, around 12 months, all the way up to 5 years. And then anything beyond 5 years, we're looking more at those T units. We're not breaking it down into MLU anymore. We'll talk about a TTR, which is a type token ratio, and how do we calculate that and what is the point of it. And then we'll talk about the analysis or analyzing the breakdown. So this is going to be kind of like how do we break this down into separate sections and looking at it again as that whole communication sample. And these are the things that we'll be discussing as far as what you would be looking for. You could do an informal feeding and swallowing in this part of a sample as well, because what you could do during this particular time is you could give the client a snack and have them eat or drink. So you could potentially do that at this time, but we won't really talk about that during this particular lecture. And then finally, we'll talk about how do we interpret this, since it is all an informal test. So remember, communication sampling is all informal, but how do we interpret that and then lead then to writing our goals? So another thing to keep in mind, one other thing here, you can actually, you can do an analysis of fluency. I am going to leave that alone though for this particular lecture. For my particular students, you do have an entire class on fluency. And when you're looking at sampling for fluency, it is a completely different approach. There's a lot of nuances to it. So I'm going to save that for your fluency class. So just know that you could analyze fluency, but we're not going to do it for this particular lecture. So let's get into it, collecting and transcribing. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're talking about collecting a communication sample. So one of the major problems that our clients have, students have, adults have, is that they have their theory of mind could potentially be very impaired. So especially as we kind of get into our older clients where theory of mind is highly expected, their theory of mind could be greatly impaired. So we really need to think about that when we're collecting a sample. But what we're collecting are all of these particular aspects. So, I do have nonverbals here. The term that we should be using is non-spoken. That is actually what we want to use because our clients who don't use spoken language, they still have verbal communication. We can get into the nitty-gritty of that in person if you'd like, but non-spoken really is the preferred term. But these are the sorts of things that we're looking for. So I want you to think about all of our linguistic aspects. Can they start and end a conversation? So basically being able to know, how do I start a conversation with you? But when the conversation is over, how do I end it? In our communication sample, we are looking at their vocabulary. So how robust is that vocabulary? And that's really where that TTR comes in. So this is our TTR. That's how we'll analyze that. We really look at kind of those paralinguistics. How are they communicating? Do they understand pausing and stressing and prosody? Or do we have a person who's talking in a monotone voice and they don't know how to use that particular type of their voice? And so that's something we would talk about as well. And then I want you to kind of think about extra linguistic aspects. So other parts of language that we might need to analyze as well. And of course, our non-spoken is really, really, really critical. This could even this does include even our body language, our body language and how we are carrying ourselves. So the next thing is, how do we collect a sample? So in samples, what's really awesome is that they are relatively free of cultural and linguistic biases. So that's what makes conversation samples really awesome, because you can allow your client to completely lead that sample. So one of the things that I often do for my samples is I will actually ask this the client, how do we make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? That is a huge thing. And I think I might have actually done this with my students. I'm not really sure. I don't remember if we did this in class or not, but this is one of the things that is actually a really interesting conversation to have because everybody makes a peanut butter and jelly sandwich differently. So asking them to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is pretty funny, pretty comical. So that's one of the things that we can do. Other things that really get older teenagers talking is like video games or TV shows could get a lot of people talking. So children and adults, these are just some really great things that we can ask them to talk about. Sports are really great. So you can feign ignorance with this and just tell them that you don't know how to play a particular sport. So ask them, hey, can you tell me how to play the sport? What are the rules? What is the, what's the sequence to this? And there's sequencing in every single one of these things, right? So really being able to see, do they understand the sequences? Also really looking at the details, right? Do they understand details that get left out versus details that I need to know because I'm maybe a novice to this topic and I need you to explain things to me. So those are just some examples. You could ask somebody how their day went. You could ask them to tell you what they did, what they would do if they won $1 million, or if they had the day off, if they could do whatever they wanted, what would be an ideal day for them. But what's really awesome is that it really is more this natural environment, and it helps us to really write clear goals for the client because it's going to get into more functional language for them. So we're looking at how they're currently communicating in a more natural setting because this is completely free of standardization. So there aren't rules. We're allowed to repeat. We can do conversational repairs. We want to see, can they do conversational repairs? And we can use this additionally as progress monitoring. So I don't want you to think of communication samples as a one and done. They're not one and dones, right? It's not like, oh, I do one at the initial eval or maybe at a triennial or maybe when I'm doing a check-in for a progress and then I'm done. That's not the case. We're constantly doing them even to assess monitoring progress over time because it really helps us be able to see a clear picture of our client and really helps us understand even their vocabulary levels. So tiers 1, 2, and 3, which I don't think we've really I'm pretty sure we have not gotten into extensively in class, but we can talk about those more if you don't know what those are. But really looking at basically what kind of vocabulary they're using. So really, really critical. Think about these particular tips. I love these tips. These came from Dr. Napold, who's an awesome professor up in Oregon, and she really talks about how it's really important that we are showing a lot of respect, especially to our teenage clients and our adults, that we're showing a lot of respect, that we're really listening, truly listening, not hearing, right? We're not looking for hearing. That's not what we want. We want you to listen to your client. Clients know, especially as they get older, so your teenagers and adults will know if you're not actually listening to them. If you're just in the room and you just hear them, and what that's going to do is that's going to break that rapport, any rapport you might have, or shut down the possibility of rapport. So really listening to your clients is really important. Staying calm, being supportive. Ask one question at a time. This one's really critical because when we're dealing with language disorders, asking multiple part questions or asking multiple questions at a time, this is really going to be really challenging for our client to hold that in their mind and then be able to regurgitate or be able to answer all those parts of that question. And then it's okay to be silent, and actually it's really encouraged. Just be quiet. Just let them talk. Let them do their thing. It's okay to repeat. It's okay to rephrase. Remember, this is natural. This is a natural environment. Very natural. So in environments, we repeat, we rephrase things, and that's okay. But I think the biggest tip that she has here that I think is really great is just go with the flow. Just allow this conversation to go where it's going to go because that's really going to give you good insight on your particular client. So what you're going to do when you're transcribing, sorry, this should have a title up here, and it does not, so my apologies on that, but this is transcribing. So we're going to put the title here for you, transcribe. So when we are transcribing, you're going to listen to the sample and you're going to write down what is said. So that's literally what you're going to do. If we have misarticulations, you should write those in IPA. And that's really just to help you to be able to analyze correctly. So if a client is doing final consonant deletion, like they're doing cat, we want to make sure that we have the the ca, but we're not putting the T on the end. So just making sure that we're writing that in IPA, making sure that we're bracketing it off to make it very clear that this is an IPA version, right? That this is not just your standard, we're not just writing out the word. When it comes to your particular project that I'm giving you, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that. I'm not going to be like, oh, well, I know for a fact that this person did final consonant deletion and you didn't write it that way. That's not what I'm looking for. This is just for you, really, so that you know when you go back to analyze the sample, how many final consonant deletions did we have, or gliding, or liquefaction, or anything that might be happening. So just make sure that you're writing it so that you can go back and read it later and analyze it properly later. After 3 tries, just write down what you think you heard. It's not going to hurt anything. Don't go back and listen to it 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 or 20 times. Just try it 3 times. Whatever you think you heard, write down what you heard. It's not going to so alter the entire transcription if you get 1 or 2 words wrong, or if you're not totally understanding what the client is saying. So that's completely okay. For MLU counts, you're going to split the utterances up by pauses in speaking. So if a kid says, I build big tower, pause, right? And it's a 3-second pause. It's about a 3-second pause. Once the kid kind of makes that pause, we're moving on to the next utterance. And these are each of the utterances that the child is making. If the kid says, yeah, or me want car, give me that, I want, let's go, whatever it might be, right? And then we have approximately a 3-second pause. Now we're moving on to the next utterance. For T unit counts, we're going to split them based on units. And I'm going to teach you that in a couple of slides. How do we know when a unit is complete? But these 2 particular types of transcription are different. So just make sure that it's very clear. It does not count as a transcription if it is an unintelligible utterance. So if you are not sure what that client said, that is not going to count in your 50 utterance count. What you're going to do is you're literally going to just write 3 X's. So let's say you have an utterance here. We don't know what this is. And then we have an utterance here. That's what it's going to look like. Okay. So, and then let's say this one is, 6 morphemes and this one is 4 morphemes, and then so forth and so on. But this one right here, where we don't know what they said, you're literally just going to write 3 X's. And then that is just, I don't know what they said. I listened 3 times. I still don't know what they said. We let it go. Let it go. Let it go. And we move on. Okay. So 3 X's does not count in your 50 utterances. This is an example of what a transcription might look like. So when you're setting it up, we have the people who are involved. We have the utterances, the context. If we have it, we don't always have context because sometimes we just have audio. We don't have video, and so we can't write down the context. And then MLU count, or you could do your T unit count. So remember that MLU count is only the child, that we're not looking at the SLP or any other adults. It's only the child that we're analyzing. And so the MLU count, oh, I'm sorry. This is the utterance number. There is an error on this slide. I apologize. This is an utterance number. So this is number 1, number 2, number 3. The MLU is different. So actually, let's count it real quick. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are 6 MLU. There are 6 morphemes here. 6 morphemes. I just want to be very clear there. So this is different. So this is utterance number 1, utterance number 2, utterance number 3, and then you could have, if you wanted, draw a line here, and you could have morpheme count here. Morpheme count as another column if you would like to have that. So sorry if that was confusing, but this is a complete thought that the child has, and it was understood. Oh, I'm sorry, and oh my gosh, I just made multiple mistakes. Hold on, everybody. Scratch this. We're going to erase this. We're going to start over. Hold on. Let's do something. Hold on. Because I just realized I counted the context. All right. Hold on. Whoopsie. We're going to try again here. Okay, everybody. I apologize. Scratch that. Scratch that. Let's start over. And actually, let's use a black pen. Okay. So this is utterance count. Utterance numbers. Okay. We're going to draw another line here to do morphemes. Okay, so this is utterance number 1. So scratch what I just said. That's utterance number 1. This is utterance number 2. This is utterance number 3. Okay, this particular utterance has 2 morphemes. 2 morphemes. This one has 3. Okay, this one has 2. So that would be your morpheme count for remember, because this is an MLU count. All right. So hopefully, sorry about the little confusion there. I was counting the context. So this is the context in which all of this is happening. So the child is holding up blocks, they're continuing building, they're putting more blocks on top. And this is just more for you to have, for you to say, is the child able to stick to a content? Is the child able to talk about what we're talking about? Are they staying on topic? Or are they holding up a car and saying, look, a monkey, right? And so while holding a car, a child says, look, a monkey. Without that context, you're giving that child credit. Yes, we give them credit for the language that they've spoken, but the vocabulary obviously is going to be impacted, and that would be in our interpretation section. So, okay, so sorry about that. Hopefully that's all clear now for you, but that is an example of how we might want to break down a transcription. If something else makes more sense in your head, that's totally fine. I've had students who actually do it in Excel so that their number counting, so that this particular part in the numbers can just be calculated by Excel. I would suggest if you do it in Word, I would make sure that you're doing the return, hitting the return button on your numbers so that it's automatically adjusting the numbers, so that if you make a mistake, you don't have to go back and renumber all your utterances again. That is quite frustrating. So like, let's say you accidentally put a 2 here instead of here. By erasing this, by saying like, oh shoot, I made a mistake, we erase that, right? Word would automatically bump that 2 down to there. So I would just really suggest that you do that so that you make sure that you just don't mess yourself up. Just a little pro tip there. All right, so here's what a header might look like. It's really important that we have the name of the client, the age, the date the sample is taken, who are all of the people present. What is the context as far as like, is this just a casual conversation? Is this a play environment? Are we outside? Are we in a therapy room? Sorry, that's our location, outside therapy room. Because this is really critical because this might really impact how the child is performing. Because again, MLU, this is MLU, but a T unit count, you would also want to have this exact same header. So who is the client? How old are they? Who all is present? And what you can do is so let's say your name can go here and that can equal the SLP. And then the client's name can go here and that can just equal client or whatever you might want it to equal. Or you can do initials, which is totally fine, so that you don't have to be writing out full names the whole time. So notice here, like on this one, I just did SLP and child. And so you might want to just put your name and then SLP. So you put your name, SLP, and then the kid's name, and then you could put child if you wanted. Obviously, if you're working with a teenager or an adult, please don't put child. You can put initials or put client or patient, depending on your setting. That would be really important. So the context is like, where are we, kind of what are we playing with? What are we doing? Or what are we talking about? We're sitting at a table. We're having a casual interview style conversation. Okay. So that is our communication sampling. All right, so then we need to break the whole thing down. So we're going to break them down into MLU or T units, right? So MLU or T units. So we're going to start with MLU. So this is a mean length of utterance, okay? Mean length of utterance. So what counts as an utterance? Any utterance is a complete thought. So even if it's not a complete sentence, right? So that's really important. It's not a complete sentence. It's a complete thought that the child has, which oftentimes is not a complete sentence, especially those who we are analyzing. The utterance followed by a 3-second pause, that's going to be a new utterance. So this is what we talked about, that 3 seconds, and that's approximately 3 seconds. But also single words, phrases, and sentences all count. So for an example, I want the ball would be a sentence. That's great. That counts. The kid can say big tower. That would also count. Yes, mommy, up, give me the ball. Okay. If this kid says, yes, mommy, up, give me the ball. That's one full utterance, even though that's not how we would break it down in grammatically correct sentences, but that would be considered the child's full utterance. So really that pause, that's really our barrier for when our utterance is going to move on to the next utterance. So we want to think about that when we're breaking down utterances. Okay, so that's kind of the basics of how we break that down. And we're going to practice this some more. So how do we count our MLUs? So how do we count morphemes, right? So we know morphemes, we have different kinds. We have free morphemes, we have bound morphemes. So those particular ones are going to count as each one morpheme. So each bound morpheme is going to be one morpheme. So if we have the word cats, that is 2 morphemes. Okay, 2 morphemes. Contractions are 1 morpheme unless, this is really, really critical, unless the child has demonstrated their ability to use the words in an uncontracted way. Oh, I'm sorry. This says unless they use the word not in a contraction. So uncontracted, not in a contraction. So if at some point in time they have used the word can, not, right? That's uncontracted. And then a later time they use the word can't, we would count this as 2 morphemes because they've demonstrated that they know how to do this uncontracted. But if they never demonstrate that skill ever in the sample, when you are taking the sample, this would only count as 1 morpheme. Okay, because contractions will develop before uncontracted words. And so oftentimes kids don't necessarily know, that that's 2 different words. So it's really, really critical that we don't give them 2 morphemes if they haven't demonstrated that. All right, compound words are going to count as 2 morphemes. Words that go together like Mickey Mouse, choo-choo train, those sorts of things, always 1 morpheme. Just 1 because it's considered 1 unit together. And then onomatopoeias, meow, kerplunk, splash, those sorts of things are just 1 morpheme. All right. And then you'll probably come up with some other things, kind of funky things that kids do. So that we'll go through those kind of different things that kids might be able to do. So here's a couple examples. So like I am running. So this is going to be 4 morphemes. So I am running because this is a root word and this is a suffix. So a bound morpheme. She likes cats. So she likes cats. Right? That's going to be 5. It's my birthday. So it is my birthday. Or remember, this could be it's. That could be 1. So this could be 4 or 5 morphemes. Okay, so just some examples for you to take a look at. And then how do we calculate? So in order to get an MLU count, you're going to do the total number of morphemes. So let's say we have 100 morphemes, right? We got 100 morphemes. We're going to have 50 utterances because for this project, you're only going to count 50 for me. And you're going to divide that. And what does that equal? Okay. And so 100 divided by 50, and that'll spit out a number for you. And then these are the expectations that we have. These are expectations. Please note that these are Brown stages. So these are expectations when we have a monolingual child. So this is a monolingual child. Monolingual. So this is going to be a little bit different when we have our bilingual or multilingual children. But just kind of give you some ranges. And please note that they are ranges. So kids have ranges on what they can have as far as their expectations for their MLU count. Okay, so I have ranges here. And then for our children who speak more than 1 language, I'm not going to read this. I'll let you kind of go over this. But this is what we expect for our children who do have more than 1 language. So just go through this, what is expected of their particular language with them. Okay, so let's move on. So this is 5 years and plus. So this is 5 years over. So they're out of that Brown's morpheme stage. Now we're speaking really in full sentences, compound, complex sentences. So now really an MLU count doesn't make any sense anymore. So now we're looking at units. So what constitutes as a unit? So 1 main clause. What you also might notice, this is an independent clause. So independent. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second. So an independent clause, it's basically a sentence that can stand on its own. She is going. That is an independent clause. So that would count as 1 unit. That's 1 T unit. Another thing that would count is 1 main clause plus any subordinating clauses or non-clausal structures that are embedded in. So a lot of you are like, what the heck does that mean? So here we go. Here's a main clause. She decided to go for a walk. That's a full sentence. Right? Our subordinating clause, so subordinating conjunction. So if you don't remember subordinating conjunctions, make sure you look into those. Because the weather was nice. So that's a subordinating clause started by a subordinating conjunction. So the whole phrase is she decided to go for a walk because the weather was nice. That also equals 1 unit. Okay, 1 single unit. Now, clauses that begin with coordinating conjunctions. So if you don't remember your coordinating conjunctions, please make sure you look those up. Your fanboys are really, really important, okay? So coordinating conjunctions also are T units. So the first T unit, I want to go to the park. I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. So what you will notice is if I were to write this entire sentence grammatically, I wanted to go to the park. Grammatically, we need to put a comma, but it started to rain. And how do we know that these can stand on their own? The reason why we know they can stand on their own is there's your subject. I wanted to go to the park, to the park. So to the park is our prepositional phrase. So I wanted to go, full sentence. It's an independent clause, right? With our subject, wanted to go, our verb. But this is our coordinating conjunction. It is going to be this is our subject again. It started to rain is a prepositional phrase. This is our verb here, so verb here, right? So we have a subject and a verb with prepositional phrases. So prepositional phrase. But these two phrases are completely independent. I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. These are two independent clauses that can completely stand on their own, indicating that this is 2 units. And they're being combined into a compound sentence with that coordinating conjunction and the comma. Now, here is where, so notice this little plus sign here. Here is the caveat to that. If we do not have the co-referential subject, so let's say the second subject is, this one's going to be a little bit tricky. Let me actually give you a different phrase. So, I wanted apples, so I went to the store, right? So again, so is going to be a coordinating conjunction. I wanted apples, so I went to the store, 2 independent clauses. Darn it, I'm so sorry. This one actually is, this one is actually not going to be a great one for that either. Let's do and instead of so. All right, so let's do I wanted apples and I went to the store. If I get rid of the I would have to get rid of my comma because now I have an independent clause. I wanted apples and went to the store, and a dependent clause. So dependent and independent. That is your co-referential subject because I eliminated the subject. So I wanted apples and I went to the store. So I is the subject. I eliminate the subject, making this second phrase a dependent clause. And the first one an independent clause, meaning that this would only equal 1 unit. Okay, so any independent clauses are going to equal 1 unit. So if I put 2 independent clauses together joined with a coordinating conjunction, that is going to be 2 independent clauses. That will be 2 units. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. We can definitely go over that some more, but always think independent clauses always count as a unit. If an independent clause has a dependent clause on it, then it's going to be 1 unit. If it's an independent clause joined with another independent clause, that's 2 units. So in other words, the shortest sentence that can possibly be written, that legally, grammatically can be written, that's a T unit. The shortest sentence that can legally be written grammatically, that you're good to go, that's a T unit. I do want to take a moment here to talk about what is called they're called back channel cues. So back channel cues are an indication, something that a speaker might give their listener to let them know that they're listening. So things like, I hear ya, yeah, yeah, that sort of a thing. It's not I'm agreeing with you, I'm just letting you know that I'm listening. Those do not count in a T unit count. They're not considered to be a T unit. That's, again, it's called back channel cues. And it's more just letting the listener know that I'm listening to you. So don't count those in your T unit counts, just so that you know. Okay, so that you know when you're doing your T unit counts. So here are some examples. So I wanted to go to the park. However, it started to rain. right? So that is going to be, that's two different phrases. However, this is a dependent clause. This is an independent clause. However, it started to rain cannot stand on its own. So because of this, however, that's why it makes it into one T unit. If you did replace this with but, now we've changed it to a coordinating conjunction. Now it would change this to an independent clause, and this would be 2 units. Okay, but because however is being used here, and however it started to rain is not a grammatically correct sentence, that doesn't count. Okay, she waited until he arrived. That's 1 unit. I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. Here we go. So there's the example. I wanted to go to the park, but it started to rain. So that's 2 units. She likes ice cream, but she does not like cupcakes. We have an independent clause and an independent clause. So 2 units there. All right, and we'll practice that a little bit more. So here is why grammar really, 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 really matters once again, because you must know what is an independent clause, what is a dependent clause, know your grammar. All right, but what do we do with that kid or that adult that does and, like our and then? Name that movie. Somebody tell me, after you listen to this lecture, tell me when you get to class, what movie is that? And then. Because we've all had those clients where they ramble for a long time. Oh, I want to tell you about my day. Well, first I went to the store, and then Mommy took me to my friend's house, and then I got to pick out my pink unicorn shoes, and then I got to wear my pink unicorn shoes, and then my friend told me that she wanted to be best friends forever, and then we had a sleepover, and then we had ice cream, and then we had pizza, and then we stayed up all late, and then we were tired the next day, and you're like, oh my gosh, this kid just rambled and rambled and rambled. So what you do with that is you're going to write the first unit out. So I don't even remember the first thing I said, but I had a sleepover and my best friend came. My best friend came. So we're going to give them that whole unit. Okay, so that's 2 T units, right? I had a sleepover and my best friend came. From then on out, and we ate cupcakes, and we ate pizza, and we stayed up too late, and we did this, and we did this, and we did this. What you're going to do is you're going to put that and in parentheses, and we ate cupcakes. Okay? And we ate pizza. And moving forward, this and is not going to be counted. Only this particular I apologize. Sorry. Only this particular unit is going to be counted until they finish the and thing. Okay, so you'll count the first one. Great coordinating conjunction there. And then moving forward, we don't count the rest of the ands while they're just rambling. Just break it down into its T units, but excluding those ands until they stop with the rambling of the and. Right? So hopefully that makes sense. And then that and just won't be counted in your T unit count. You kind of just basically act as if the word doesn't exist. Okay? So just basically act as if the word does not exist. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense for you. And then that you'll know what to do with that particular kiddo when it comes to that kid. All right? Okay. All right, so once we then go to do the calculations, right? So we're going to do the calculations, and we're going to do what is called an MLTU. So a mean length of T units. So mean length of T units. And what we're going to do is, again, we're going to get those total number of words. So this is total number of words. And then you will take the total number of words, and you're going to divide that by the total number of T units. So total number of words divided by the total number of T units. And our expectations, so again, you can see if we have a kid who's talking and they're really talking a lot, you can go ahead and do a T unit with a kid who's 3 to 4 years old if they have, if they are using more advanced language, they're using simple sentences, and they're kind of talking to where we're well above and beyond maybe those Brown's morphemes, or you want to go ahead and just do an MLTU, that's completely fine. But we do want to make sure that the kid is speaking in long enough sentences to do a T unit before we do a T unit. Okay, but these are the expectations. So again, this is an average range. So this is just a range. and kind of what we expect. So how many words do we expect per T unit? And these are just a brief overview. This is not comprehensive, right? This is just saying like, these are how many, approximately the description of the types of words that we're expecting for this particular age range. All right. And I gave you examples here. Okay, so we're good to go. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. We'll get more into that as we're practicing in class, but that's your basics. So the next thing we're going to move on to is a TTR. So a TTR is a type token ratio. So what a type token ratio is, this talks about the complexity of the language. So we might have a child who, let's say, like, or an adult or young adult who maybe they are giving us, let's say they're falling within this range. We have a 10-year-old who is giving us 8 to 11 words per phrase. And that's, we're like, okay, so their MLTU is average. But then we get into a TTR and we realize that their language is not very complex, which means that they're using the same words over and over and over and over again. Okay, so we're really missing the complexity, which really tells us that we don't have a very robust vocabulary, or maybe we're even missing entire parts of speech. So that's why a type token ratio can really be really beneficial. So what we're doing with a type token ratio is we are looking to categorize each word. So we are literally going to categorize every single word from that sample. What's great is you live in 2025, you have AI. AI can definitely help you with this, but sometimes it does make mistakes. So make sure that you please double check it and make sure that you're looking, okay, did we actually, did it break down things correctly? Because it doesn't always know its parts of speech so well. So you'll take every word and you're going to place it into some grammatical category. So whether it's a noun, a verb, adverbs, etc., what is the part of speech that that word is? You're going to count the total number of words in the sample. So how many words are in the sample? Microsoft Word can do this, right? So you can do this in Word. Okay, do this in Word, and then you can double check it in Copilot if you would like, but definitely use your tools. Don't sit there and hand count every word. Just look at the bottom of your Microsoft Word page, how many words are in the sample. Making sure that this is only the client. Only the client. Make sure you take out the SLP's words. And I'm going to show you a couple tricks in class on how we do this, but just making sure that you're taking out that you only have the clients. So that's your token. So they're called tokens. Total number of words are called tokens. Then what you're going to do is count the total number of different words. So how many different words do we have? And then that is going to be your types. And then to calculate a TTR, you're going to do the number of types divided by the number of tokens and multiply that by 100. And that's going to give you your TTR. Okay, so that will tell us how complex is this language. So we have all these words, but are they actually complex? So here is just an example of how you might break that down. So we have 3 cats, we have 2 dogs, we have 3 houses, 1 shoe, 5 running, 4 jumping, so on and so forth. So that's the total number of words. And what you can see here is you can see, is a particular word being used over and over and over and over again. So maybe in your conjunctions, so you have conjunctions, junctions. And what you might see is on the word and, it might look something like this. Oops. That might what it looks like, but then you have maybe the word but, and maybe there's only, like, let's say 10 of them, but then those are the only conjunctions that the particular client has. So that really gives you an indication, like, okay, we have tons of nouns and this could go on and on and on forever. And maybe this is where this ends. We don't have a lot of adverbs, or maybe we don't have a lot of adjectives. And let's say we do have some verbs, but not as many verbs as we do nouns. And we only have a couple of conjunctions. So that really lets us dig into the complexity of the language and really talk about what specifically is missing in this client's language. Are we really noun heavy? Are we really lacking in our adjectives? So we can't tell a very descriptive story because I don't even have adjectives in my language. It's not in my vernacular. So if I don't have the adjectives, I'm not going to be able to tell the story, right? I'm not going to be able to explain this to you. If I only have 2 conjunctions in my vocabulary, I'm not going to be able to then give you really complex sentences because I'm not going to be able to use those complex phrases. So this is where the TTR, yes, it is very time consuming. I do apologize. Please use AI. Use AI. It really helps, but double check it. But use AI to help you break this down. So you'll make this beautiful chart in order to be able to have your TTR, okay? So that's TTR. We're going to calculate. So it's looking at the complexity of language. This is the calculation for it. And then this is kind of how you could break it down. Your chart does not have to look like this. You do not have to copy me exactly. This is just how I do mine. I think it's just easier to look at. So whatever makes the most sense to you. Again, I have students who've used Excel. They love Excel, and that's totally fine. I don't care how you do it. It is irrelevant to me how you do it as long as it gets done. So then we need to analyze this breakdown. So we need to keep in mind, we have to explain what we found in each section. So this is going to go in that informal section of our particular report, right? This is not the interpretation section. We're just explaining what did we find. So this is just like facts, okay? Literally just facts in speech, language, play and pragmatics, voice, non-spoken language. And again, remember you can do fluency, which we're not doing. You can do feeding and swallowing, which again, we're not doing for this particular one. Voice will be informal, and you'll learn that more when we get to voice. We haven't talked about that yet, so that's not something that you really have to think about right now. We'll talk about that when we get to that section, but that is something you would want to talk about. Is the person monotone? Are they using prosody correctly? Do they have a raspy voice, a hoarse voice? Those sorts of things would also go into our communication sample. But what you're going to say is just state facts. So remember, in our report, we have the reason for referral, we have a background information, we have formal testing, then we have informal testing, and this is where our communication sample goes. And we're literally just writing the facts because we have not gotten to the interpretation section yet. So facts, speech, factually, developmentally, this is what we would expect. Here's what we found. Factually, how is it impacting their function? How are they it's the baseline. What are they currently functioning at? And we're going to do that for each one of the sections, right? So communication sample, we're going to go through and say, here's what the speech sounded like. Here's what the language sounded like. This is what play pragmatics looked like. This is their voice. This is non-spoken. But we're not interpreting or explaining how that impacts it all. It's just stating a fact of what they were and weren't able to do versus age expectations, right? So it's the same as when you're in your formal testing, when we're saying the child is performing below expectations, or the child is performing within the average expectations, or the adult is performing below their personal baseline, or they're performing within the range of their baseline pre-injury. And so we want to think about that. So what was the baseline of our client pre-injury or an accident, so a TBI or a stroke? What was their baseline and how are they functioning now compared to that? And you get that information. That's going to be in your background information. That's going to be your case history, talking to the family, talking to the client. How were they functioning before and where are we functioning now? So that's just facts. Then we get into the interpretation and goal writing. So remember that each section has its own interpretation. We do not mix speech and language. We do not mix receptive expressive language. You want to make sure that you keep those things separately. Okay, so what you're going to do for this particular section is you're going to say in the speech section, so in the interpretation for speech, based on case history, client report, family report, parent report, whoever's reporting, formalized testing, informal testing, we either see consistencies or inconsistencies. This is what we're seeing, and here is the impact of that. So interpreting what we're seeing. So based on their intelligibility, we are 75% intelligible. These are the expectations. How is this impacting my life? How does this impact my life socially, vocationally, educationally? And here is where it is really important that we name the disorder. So we break down the parts. We talk about how they are or will impact our life of our client, whether that's a child or an adult. And then we're going to say, now, is there a disorder? And you must name the disorder that is present. Do we have a speech sound disorder? Do we have a receptive language disorder? Do we have a pragmatic language disorder? Making sure that we are naming it. But for each section, making sure that we are separating those out and talking about speech versus receptive language versus expressive language and so forth and so on. That we never mix these sections. And we always talk about the impact based on each one of these sections. And you might see a little bit of overlap, but it's still important that, like, as far as how it could impact them, but it's still really, really critical that we talk about the different sections by themselves, that we don't actually mix them. So when we go to write goals, again, each section has their own goals. There's no blending. Do not write a speech and language goal together. Do not write a receptive expressive language goal together. These are vastly different skills with vastly different expectations. So please make sure that you keep those separated. Be really clear. You want to make sure that your goals can be understood by others. So just ask a colleague to read your goals and say, if you got this goal, do you know how to collect data? Do you know what my objective is here? So making sure they're very clear, making sure that you think about the prompting level. And we know this because we've done a dynamic assessment. So we've done a dynamic assessment. And so we know what kind of prompting levels are going to be needed for this client. Please do not always put a minimal verbal prompting. That does not work for every client. So just keeping that in mind, that prompting levels definitely need to be thought about based on dynamic assessment and what our client actually needs. When it comes to children, we want to think about matching them to their age-matched peers and the things that, and being able to, what is their developmental level, right? So development and matching to age-matched peers, that's going to be really critical. Versus our adults, we want to think about how were they prior to their injury and talk about their personal expectations, right? So really critical that we're talking to our adults about their personal expectations. Do you expect to go back to work, or do you expect to just have functional language? What is your goal, and how do I help you accomplish this? So I'm going to write a goal that helps you to accomplish those goals. You can also do this with your teens. You can ask your teens about, even if it's just, it's not a TBI or a stroke in a teen, if it is just your classic language disorder, we can even ask them like, hey, what is your goal? What are you plan on doing? Are we going to go to college? Are we going into a vocation? What kind of vocation? What's the kind of language that you need? Thinking about function all the time. What is functional for our clients, right? So what is functional for this client, and how do I help you meet those particular goals? Okay, that was a ton. Let me know what questions you have. Sorry about the little mistakes here and there that I had. Hopefully it didn't confuse anybody too much, and we will go over this in more detail in class. All right.